All too often, these weird bootleg games videos come up in my recommendations because YouTube has quite possibly the worst algorithms on the planet. But here's the thing, these dweebs make these videos about fan games or fan-made hacks, which, yes, within the context of the law, is a bootleg. My problem is that an actual bootleg is made with the intention of stealing intellectual properties to then slap together a game and scam folks into buying their unlicensed video games. Fan games, on the other hand, are labors of love created by people who adore the franchises they're replicating in their own way. It's no different than fan art, fan fiction, fan anything. So, just saying, if you're one of those tubers who has to generate some clickbait at the expense of fan games, you're an ass. But that leads us to my new sub-series. Since too many of the clowns on here can't quite figure it out, I'll be periodically taking a look at actual pirated and bootleg games. Like I said before, the games we're looking at are strange concoctions created solely as scams. They're wildly interesting, often terrible, and the video game equivalent of a bootleg film, like the Turkish Star Wars. So with that out of the way, even today, a whole decade and a half after they went third party, it's hard to believe that Sega and Nintendo were bitter rivals as they were in the 90s. Despite this, when Sonic began to appear on Nintendo systems, it was a big deal. And yet, Sonic had been on Nintendo systems long before Sega was even out of the console business. But it wasn't Sega, nor Nintendo that got him there. Instead, it was the fine folks of the Twin Eagles group. Don't be surprised if you've never heard of them. They're a Peruvian group of bootleggers, one of the many companies to bring unlicensed games to various systems when copyright protection and lockout chips weren't quite what they are today. Sonic the Hedgehog 4 was released sometime in September of 1996 on the Super Nintendo. You play as Sonic racing through various locales such as jungles and space to rescue Mario from cages. A lot. You'll notice the sprite work in this game actually isn't too bad, though Sonic has sprites mixed from Sonic 2 and 3 on the Genesis, and Mario seems to take after his Super Mario World look. The rest of the game is quite colorful and nice to look at, but Sonic is a little difficult to control. He also, oddly enough, never does his spin attack and instead attacks with a kick. Like many bootleg games, this isn't actually made from scratch. Instead, Sonic 4 is a sprite hack of Speedy Gonzales, Los Gatos Benditos, a pre-existing game with several of its levels cut out in order rearranged. The original title focused on rescuing all the mice from a level, rather than just running left to right. Thus, I assume the developers felt it would make a good fit for Sonic as well. This line of thinking led them to release another Super Nintendo title in 1998, Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Just like the Speedy Gonzales game, this is another sprite hack, but with even fewer changes involved. This time the original game is Sparkster, a sequel to Rocket Knight Adventures on the Genesis. Sonic 2 is interesting only for the sprite work that was done to Sonic. There's plenty of custom art created to retrofit the lead into Sonic himself. Most of it is looking pretty awful, yet kinda funny at the same time. Presumably the entire game is here, and unlike Speedy Gonzales, the game is actually pretty good, but it's not exactly what you might think of when talking bootlegs. No, we might have to go back even further, to the NES. The Hummer Team, another bootleg group from Taiwan, released one of the most infamous bootlegs ever, Somari. Somari recreates the entire first Sonic the Hedgehog game from the Sega Genesis and sticks Mario in Sonic's place. Unlike our first two games, this one was actually built from the ground up and features original, albeit recreated from the Genesis classic, art and sound. The game doesn't exactly control so hot. Somari is sometimes floaty and other times drops like a rock. Sonic's momentum is a big part of what made those games so special, and Somari doesn't come anywhere close to replicating it. Jumping, depending on what speed you're going, can slow Somari down to a halt, throwing off your timing for jumps and fighting bosses a pain. It doesn't help that the level design is clunky, with plenty of inescapable pits in the first couple of levels, to tons of repeats of sections of levels, seemingly copy and pasted beside one another. If you can believe it, there's actually hacks of this game, most of which add in Sonic instead of Mario and change the level order. The game and all of its flaws are essentially the same, though there is a fan hack that polishes the graphics and tweaks the physics to work a bit better. It's not perfect, but if you're curious, I'd recommend checking that out. But let's not limit ourselves to just consoles. Sonic made a few appearances on the Game Boy as well. Sonic 6 is another hack of a pre-existing game, and I'll let you guess what it is from the title screen music. Yep, it's Speedy Gonzales again. This game is much different from the Super Nintendo one and quite a bit rougher too. The sprites appear to be from Sonic 3 mainly, at least as best as I can make out, and don't translate too well. The gameplay is more of a standard platformer than its Super Nintendo predecessor, but due to its controls, it's much harder too. Sonic's jump is the floatiest yet and difficult to predict. It doesn't help that there's no means to defend yourself. Jumping on enemies results in instant death, as does everything in this game. There's no kick from the first game either. As far as I can tell, you're defenseless. The level order was changed to place the forest stage first again, which was actually from the middle of the original game. With everything working against you, it's a tough challenge to beat this first stage. Unlike the rest of our games so far, no one's quite sure who made this one. But given that it's a hack of Speedy Gonzales again, the prevailing theory is that it was the Twin Eagles group once more. The novelty factor wears thin much faster than any of the other games we've discussed, so if you find yourself playing this game somehow, don't expect to stick around for long. What is new, at least as far as I can tell, is Sonic Adventure 7 on the Game Boy Color. This is, by far, the worst pirated game I've ever played, and I don't say that to kick off some unfunny, incoherent rant. Sonic Adventure 7 is the kind of quality you'd expect from something that has no budget and was likely done very quickly. The opening is comprised of screen caps from Sonic and Knuckles, which look okay, though the colors get pretty wild. But that's as good as it gets. As you can see, the colors here are all over the place and look eerily reminiscent of a kid who purposely colored outside of the lines. Sonic's sprites look decent, but that's thanks in part to the original game they're swiped from, Sonic Triple Trouble on the Game Gear. I'll admit, I've neglected to comment on the sound on each game so far, often because it's pretty bad, but Adventure 7 somehow raises the bar. The shrill tones that this game produces make the hair on the back of my neck stand up, occasionally punctured by an even louder, shriller noise to signify that you picked up a ring. Look, I'm gonna be real. To be able to edit this review, I'm just gonna switch the music from here on out to the Wii Shop channel until we get to the next game. That's better. The control will leave a permanent indent on the right side of your D-pad as you desperately hold right, hoping Sonic will move just a little bit faster. Sonic does collect rings and they do protect him, but the fatal, game-breaking flaw is the complete lack of invincibility frames and how Sonic is flung backwards every time he's hurt. Spikes are everywhere and will hurt you even from the side. Coupled with an unforgiving hitbox, it makes for a first stage I've never been able to beat. Getting hit once almost always guarantees death, whether it's being flung into a pit or another hazard. There's a particular jump that's almost impossible to make without luring an enemy to give you a boost, which is tricky at best and very easy to glitch out at worst, or just outright cheating. The levels that come next don't seem to be much better, and at this point, I don't care to find out. The developer this time goes by Yang Yang, and this particular bootleg would be reproduced into two other forms from them, Sonic 3D Blast 5 on the original Game Boy, and Pokemon Jade, a Pokemon-themed version for Game Boy and Game Boy Color. Let's bring this whole thing full circle. Since Sonic made his appearances on Nintendo systems, it only makes sense that there would eventually be bootleg Sonic the Hedgehog games on the Sega Genesis. Sonic Jam 6 comes to us from GameTech. Now, given the Sonic Jam on the Saturn is a compilation of the first Genesis games with a nifty 3D world hub attached, you'd think that maybe, just maybe, this was pirates cramming a bunch of games on one cartridge, but no, it's Mario. Yeah, the first Super Mario Bros. To be exact, with graphics ripped right from Super Mario All-Stars on the Super Nintendo. Sonic himself is an odd squash version from Sonic 3 again, and aside from Sonic, the art from All-Stars still looks great on the Genesis, and there doesn't seem to be any color or palette changes either. It probably doesn't surprise you that, yet again, this is another hack of a previously existing game, but this time, it's a hack of another pirated game, almost a sort of inverse from Somari that we talked earlier. The original developers aren't fully known, but it's estimated that this game was created and released sometime around 1998. The original version goes by Super Mario Bros. 2 because Of course it does. There are plenty other Sonic bootlegs to delve into, and there's even more when you go beyond just one series. I've always been interested in these games because of their history and the fact that they can even exist at all. There's rip-offs and bootleg versions of everything imaginable, but video games take it to a whole new level. It's definitely a subject I'll be coming back to soon, probably with everyone's favorite plumber. But hey, I don't usually do this, but if there's a series you'd like to see bootlegs of, let me know in the comments below.